Good morning. Welcome to lesson 1.3 in variables and patterns. Today you'll be working through the lesson on and being able to read a graph and tell what's happening. We're going to start by correcting our homework from last night. So go ahead and get that out. Remember, you can always pause the video whenever you need to and come back to it if I'm going too quickly. Number one, your assignment was to make a coordinate graph of the popcorn data. So time of day should be on the X and total bags should be on the Y. Make sure you have labels for each, a scale, a title, and the points plotted. They counted by ones going across because that was the time given, and then they counted by tens going up. So your graph may look a little different because you had to estimate the majority of the sales, since 20 at 9 o'clock and 30 at 11 o'clock were the only ones that were exactly on a 10. For part B, it asks you to describe the number of bags of popcorn sold during each, as it changed during the day. So you can see that they wrote a very long response. At this point, I don't expect your response to be that detailed, but I do want you to say something more than it varied throughout the day. Okay, so I want you to make sure we're reading this yellow part here. It says it's important to give students examples of complete and thoughtful answers early in the unit so they have a sense of what is expected. So I would expect you would say something like, very few bags were sold in the morning, maybe because people don't eat popcorn. The number of bags jumped after the breakfast hour, maybe people had a snack. Then it went up again. At noon, they sold the most bags because that was lunchtime. Then they started to drop again as there was, I don't know, maybe people went back to work. It doesn't say where they were. Oh, convenience store. And then again, there was a jump for like snack time in the afternoon. And then the number of bags dropped until after dinner time, right? So just make sure you have some kind of thoughtful response that gives at least two details about what was happening. For question C, which hour did they sell the most? They sold the most between 11 and noon, and they sold the least between 1 and 2. On question 2, you were looking at Mary's graph here, time on the bottom, Jack's on the Y. It says, what does the graph tell you about Mary's experiment? So question A says possible answer. The graph showed that Mary was timed for 120 seconds. It shows the number of jumping jacks she did in each 10-second increment. How is her graph different than ours? That was question B. You can tell right away by looking, her graph is different than ours. This graph is not the total, right? It's each interval, and our graph was the total. It was cumulative. So she's just saying at 10 seconds, I jumped 11. At 20 seconds, I jumped 11. At 30 seconds, I jumped 12. So it's just each increment, how many did she jump? And her total number then would be 135. You would have to, you probably could be 1 or 2 off of that for estimation, but you would add each, 11 plus 11 plus 12 plus 14, etc., to get 135. Number 3 is after doing the jumping jack experiment, Andrea and Ken compare their graphs because the points on his graph are higher. Ken says he did more jumping jacks than Andrea. Do you agree? If you look carefully, you would disagree because Ken has a higher point, but if you look at his scale goes to 80, while hers goes to 160. So if you look, her total jumping jacks was about 110, and his was little over 70. And I think that concludes the homework correcting, so go ahead and take a minute to label your table of contents, lesson 1.3. It is February 26th. All right, in today's lesson 1.3, you will be on page 10 to follow along. I will read to you the situation that's going on. When you're doing this lesson, it's going to be helpful to pause after each part and then do that question. I'm going to give you hints about each one. So take a minute and get yourself ready, and then let's get started. Sydney, Liz, Celia, and Malcolm and Theo found they could comfortably ride from 60 to 90 miles in one day. That's after their test rides. These are the college students that are organizing the tour. They used these findings as well as a map and campground information to plan a 3-day tour route. They wonder if steep hills and rough winds coming off the ocean might make the trip too difficult for some riders. It's time to test the projected tour route. The students want the trip to attract middle school students, so Sydney asked her 13-year-old brother, Tony, and her 14-year-old sister, Sarah, to come along. The students will collect data during their trip and use the data to write detailed reports. Using the reports, they can improve their plans and explain the trip to potential customers. So now they're going to test out what they really want to do. They begin their bike tour in Atlantic City and ride 5 hours south to Cape May, New Jersey. Sydney and Sarah follow in a van with camping gear. Sarah records the distances traveled until they reach Cape May. She makes the table at the right. So this is Sarah's table. From Cape May, they take a ferry across the Delaware Bay to Lewis, Delaware. They camp that night in a state park along the ocean. So here's their table. She's counting every half hour and saying how far they are, how far they've gone. And it's cumulative, so they go a total of 45. So part A says make a coordinate graph of the time and distance data in Sarah's table. Show time on the X. Don't forget to label, and don't forget to make an appropriate scale. The time scale is done for you. The distance scale, they go up to 45, so think about what you want to count by. Counting by tens might not be accurate enough in this instance. If you need to pause to make that graph, go ahead and do that now. So you have your graph. Again, make sure that you've labeled both axes, make a title, plot the points. All right, then you need to analyze your graph by answering the questions. Give the coordinates for the third point on your graph. So count 1, 2, 3. What does that information give you? So give it in an ordered pair of X, comma, Y. Then tell what that information means in relation to the bike tour. Part 2 says connecting the points on a graph sometimes helps you see a pattern more clearly. You can connect the points to consider what is happening in the intervals between the points. So connecting the points means you're looking at what's happening in between. So it wants you to connect the points on your graph with a straight line segment. So you might want to use a straight edge. You can use your template or a ruler or the side of your book. Use the line segments to estimate the distance traveled after 3/4 of an hour. So how far do you think they will be between 1/2 hour and 1 whole hour? Go ahead and pause so that you can do that problem. Question 3 says the straight line segments you drew from 4.5 to 40, x 4.5, y 40 to x 5.0, y 45 shows the progress if the riders traveled at a steady rate for the entire half hour. Not really likely to happen, right? The actual pace of the group and individual riders may vary throughout the half hour. These paths show some ways the riders may have progressed. You want to do a matching problem here. Match each of these connecting paths with the travel notes noted below. Celia rode slowly at first, then gradually increased her speed. Tony and Liz rode quickly and reached the campsite early. Malcolm had a flat tire, so he had to start late. And Theo started out fast. He soon felt tired and slowed down. So take a minute to look at those. I'm going to show you one thing you can think about here on the next page. you can look at each of these graphs and think about which one, what would it look like if you put it on the graph? How does that, what is being represented here? What is being represented here? Think about that in relation to each of the problems before. Take a minute, pause, and do question 3. Question C says, Sydney wants to describe day 1 of the tour. Using information from the table or the graph, what can she write about the day's travel? Consider the following questions. There are 3 questions here. You need to write more than 1 sentence. You need to answer all of these questions, make a nice paragraph that Sydney might have used. How far did they travel? How long did it take? What time intervals did they go the greatest? What time intervals did they go the least? Did they go farther in the first or the second half? Make sure you're writing nicely and legibly so you can share this with us tomorrow. Pause for a minute to complete that question. In question D, Sydney wants to include either the table or the graph in her report. Which do you think she should include? Why? So she only can pick one. Which one should she use? Don't forget to explain why. And that is all of our classwork for today. So make sure you have completed your classwork before moving on to the homework. You have problems 4 and 5 and 26. Again, it looks like not very much for 3 problems, but you do have to make a coordinate graph in question 4, and then you have to analyze that graph like we did today in B, C, D, and E. Question 5 does also have you make a coordinate graph, see here in D. Then 26, it is about daylight hours. Describe any relationships you see. What do you see happening on the table? Then here it says sketch a coordinate graph. When you see the word sketch a coordinate graph versus make a coordinate graph, you do not have to be as accurate. You don't have to, you still have to label it and still have to have a title. You do not have to make a scale. You can, and you don't have to plot the points exactly, just sketch what would generally be happening. And then in C, it also has you sketch a graph of the seasons in the opposite hemisphere. So knowing that the northern hemisphere is winter, then the southern hemisphere is summer, and vice versa. So I hope you were able to get a lot of work done today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, where we'll start by going over the classwork and then the homework. So I expect both to be done tomorrow when I see you. Thanks so much. Have a great day.